Hello, everybody. Welcome to Steve's View. A lot of people have been saying lately that American politics feels more divided than ever. On the left, there are folks pushing for big changes in culture, identity, and the economy. On the right, you've got conservatives warning that the country is moving too fast, too far, and in the wrong direction. And then, in the middle, there's a huge group of ordinary Americans who are just trying to make sense of it all. So today, I want to dive into this debate. Is the United States really swinging too far to the left? Are we actually seeing the rise of extreme left-wing movements, some even say communist tendencies, in our politics and culture? And what does it all mean for the future of the country? Now, this isn't just a theoretical debate. Recent events have made people on both sides very nervous. Just a few days ago, there was a shocking attack on Charlie Kirk, one of the most visible conservative commentators in America. For many on the right, that attack felt like proof that political violence from the far left is becoming a real danger. But is that the whole story? Or is it just one more tragic incident in a much larger pattern of polarization that's tearing at the fabric of American society? That's what we're going to talk about. We'll look at the arguments from conservatives who say the left has gone off the rails. We'll also consider the reality. How much of this is fact, and how much of it is political storytelling meant to rally people to one side or the other? And finally, we'll think about what all this polarization means for the future of the U.S., whether America can actually find some balance again, or if we're heading toward even deeper conflict. First, let's talk about something that comes up a lot in American politics, the idea of the pendulum. People often say U.S. politics swings back and forth. Sometimes the country leans left, other times it leans right. After the Great Depression, for example, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal expanded the government's role in the economy. But later, during the 1980s, Ronald Reagan pushed back with a conservative wave that focused on smaller government and free markets. So in that sense, the idea that America shifts between left and right isn't new. What feels different today is the intensity. Instead of gentle swings, the pendulum feels like it's crashing from one side to the other, and the language politicians use is more extreme than ever. Each side talks about the other not just as opponents, but as existential threats. That's part of why people are saying America is too left right now. But let's break that down a little bit more. When people say the U.S. has moved too far left, they usually point to three areas: culture, academia, and policy. Culturally, there's been a big shift in how Americans talk about gender, race, and identity. Issues like pronouns, gender-neutral bathrooms, and debates over school curriculums have become front-page news. For conservatives, these feel like radical changes being forced onto society too quickly. For progressives, they're simply overdue steps toward inclusion and equality. In universities and media, the environment often leans progressive. Students are encouraged to think critically about privilege, systemic racism, and historical injustice. That can sound like indoctrination to conservatives who feel their values are being dismissed or ridiculed. On top of that, social media amplifies the loudest voices, making the cultural shift seem even bigger than it might actually be. Policy-wise, Democrats under Biden and before him, under Obama, have pushed for stronger government roles in healthcare, climate policy, and economic regulation. There's been talk about student debt relief, higher taxes on the wealthy, and major investments in green energy. None of these ideas are communist by any stretch, but they're enough for critics to argue the country is moving away from free market principles. Now here's the thing. While the left has definitely gained ground in some areas, calling it communism or extreme left doesn't really hold up under closer inspection. The U.S. economy is still overwhelmingly capitalist. Businesses dominate, Wall Street is thriving, and the wealth gap hasn't exactly shrunk. Even the most progressive Democrats, like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, talk about higher taxes and universal health care, not abolishing private property or nationalizing industries. Those are big debates, sure, but they're still within the framework of capitalism. So when conservatives say America is becoming communist, that's more of a political talking point than a description of reality. What's really happening is that cultural and social issues have moved faster than many people are comfortable with, and that discomfort is being labeled as a dangerous leftist takeover. Let's circle back to the attack on Charlie Kirk. Incidents like this are shocking, but we need to be careful about what conclusions we draw. Was this about politics? Was it an unstable individual? Or was it something in between? What's undeniable is that political violence in the US has been rising, but it's not just from the left. Remember the January 6th storming of the Capitol? That was an example of right-wing violence. On the other side, there have been Antifa clashes and attacks linked to individuals who identify with far-left causes. In short, both extremes are guilty of fueling violence. The danger comes when each side points to the violence of the other as proof that their opponents are not just wrong, but evil. That's how polarization hardens. Instead of seeing violence as the tragic act of extremists, it becomes a way to brand an entire political movement as illegitimate. It's important to recognize the power of storytelling in politics. Conservatives often frame America's current struggles as a battle between tradition and chaos. They argue that the left is dismantling the cultural foundations of the country, family, religion, patriotism, and replacing them with relativism, identity politics, and government dependency. For many people, especially older Americans or those in rural areas, this story resonates. It explains why their world feels unfamiliar, why values they grew up with seem less respected, and why institutions they trusted, like schools, churches, or even the military, feel like they've changed. The Charlie Kirk attack fits neatly into this narrative. It's seen as proof that the left's rhetoric isn't just about debate, it's inspiring violence. Whether that's true or not, the perception is powerful. And in politics, perception can matter just as much as reality. On the flip side, progressives see things very differently. For them, America has been too slow to address injustice. They point to systemic racism, wealth inequality, gender discrimination, and climate change as urgent problems that can't be solved with small tweaks. They believe bold policies are needed, even if they disrupt the status quo. Progressives also argue that conservative rhetoric often exaggerates their goals. For example, pushing for student debt relief isn't communism. It's recognizing that millions of Americans are crushed by loans in an economy where higher education is nearly essential. Fighting climate change isn't about destroying capitalism. It's about avoiding environmental disaster. To progressives, conservative warnings about extreme left movements are just fear tactics designed to keep things the same. And from their perspective, the real danger isn't too much change, but not enough. Here's the bottom line. Whether you lean left or right, the biggest problem America faces isn't that the country is drifting into communism, or that conservatism is making a comeback. The real danger is the polarization itself. When each side views the other not just as wrong, but as a threat to democracy, compromise becomes impossible. Every election feels like a fight for survival. Every policy debate becomes a zero-sum game. And in that environment, violence doesn't just become more likely, it becomes almost inevitable. That's why events like the Charlie Kirk attack matter so much. Not just because of the violence itself, but because of how they're used to deepen the divide. Conservatives see it as proof the left is dangerous. Progressives see the conservative reaction as proof the right is fear-mongering. And round it goes. So, what's the way out? Honestly, it won't be easy, but there are a few things that could help. First, Americans need to separate individuals from entire movements. Just because one extremist commits violence doesn't mean millions of people on that side are guilty. Holding entire groups responsible only fuels more anger. Second, politicians and media figures need to be more careful with their language. When leaders constantly describe their opponents as enemies of freedom, traitors, or threats to civilization, they legitimize extreme responses. Words matter, and right now, American political language is full of gasoline. Third, both sides need to focus on issues where compromise is possible. Infrastructure, childcare, small business support, these are areas where common ground can still be found. It's not as exciting as fighting a culture war, but it's how trust starts to rebuild. Finally, Americans have to remember the pendulum. Politics swings back and forth. No victory is permanent, no defeat is final. The system was built that way. The danger isn't the swing, it's forgetting that the swing is normal and treating it as the end of the world. So, is America too left right now? Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that cultural and social changes have accelerated, and that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. No, in the sense that the U.S. is still fundamentally capitalist, democratic, and shaped by checks and balances that prevent any extreme from taking over completely. The attack on Charlie Kirk is tragic and disturbing, but it doesn't prove that America is collapsing into communism. What it does prove is that political violence, fueled by polarization, is becoming a bigger threat than any one ideology. If America wants to stay strong, the focus shouldn't be on blaming the left or the right. It should be on reducing polarization itself, because at the end of the day, a divided America is a weaker America. And if there's one thing both sides should be able to agree on, it's that this country is worth protecting even if we disagree about how. That's all for today. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.